Keep it simple and follow your heart. This is a beautiful line from her social media profile. She was a young, beautiful, and optimistic international student who had just graduated from the University of Technology, Sydney. She had secured her dream job and was brimming with hope for the future. However, it seemed that fate had played a cruel trick on her. Just as her life was about to open a new chapter, a silent nightmare descended, and she vanished from this world without a trace. Today, we will uncover the tragic case of a Chinese international student who was murdered in Australia. This case shocked the entire Chinese community in Australia, leaving everyone heartbroken, who ultimately took the vibrant life of this young woman. To find out, let us turn back time to 2016 and examine the details of the case. Australia is an enormous country, yet its population is just under 27 million. For this reason, Australia is very welcoming to immigrants. For many years, Australia has attracted immigrants from all over the world, including a large number of international students. Many Chinese students choose Australia as their study destination. The story we discuss today took place in New South Wales, home to the city of Sydney. The protagonist of this story is Michelle Lang, who came from Sichuan, China. With her outstanding academic performance, she studied at the University of Technology, Sydney, and had just graduated. Michelle was born in 1991 in Chengdu, Sichuan, as the only child in a loving family. Her parents cherished her dearly, and the three lived in harmony. Michelle had an outgoing and cheerful personality, and she was always well-liked by her friends, often surrounded by a lively group. She excelled academically from a young age and was a favorite among her teachers. In 2008, Michelle was about to finish her final year of high school, preparing for a crucial milestone in her life, the college entrance exams. With her excellent academic record, she had been studying diligently for a long time and felt confident about the exams. However, an unexpected disaster struck: the 2008 Sichuan earthquake. This catastrophic event tore many families apart. Tragically, Michelle's father lost his life in the earthquake. Despite her profound grief, she persevered, focused on her studies, and successfully completed the college entrance exams, gaining admission to Sichuan University, a prestigious institution majoring in broadcasting and television. Michelle's mother was immensely proud of her daughter, who had become her sole hope for the future. Throughout her university years, Michelle continued to study hard and excel. She also aspired to study abroad. At first, her mother was hesitant about the idea. After all, there were just the two of them left, and moving overseas would mean seeing each other even less often. Yet, she ultimately decided to support her daughter's dream. They chose Australia as the destination for Michelle's studies. One of the reasons for selecting Australia was that Michelle's aunt was already living there. In the eyes of many families in China, having a relative in a foreign country provides some comfort and support, especially for a young woman navigating life in an unfamiliar place. In 2011, Michelle left her mother to study abroad in Australia. She enrolled in the hospitality management program at the University of Technology, Sydney, and lived with her aunt. The house was located in Campsie, New South Wales, just over 6 miles from downtown Sydney. The area had numerous Chinese supermarkets and restaurants, offering great convenience for everyday life, with easy access to work and school in Sydney. Here, let's briefly introduce her aunt's family. Michelle's aunt, Zhang Fang, did not live alone. She was married to Derek Barrett, who was just 2 years older than Michelle and had 2 children from a previous marriage. They had only recently gotten married, and Michelle had even attended their wedding, contributing to the ceremony's expenses. So the 5 of them lived together harmoniously under one roof. Despite living in a foreign country, Michelle's optimistic personality helped her quickly adapt to life in Australia, and she developed strong friendships. Over the following years, Michelle excelled in her studies and achieved outstanding academic results. She frequently shared joyful moments on social media, posting photos of food and happy memories, which showed how much she enjoyed her life there. Time flew by, and in 2015, Michelle graduated from the University of Technology, Sydney. She wanted to work in Australia for a few years before planning her next steps. She had discussed this decision with her mother while she was still a student. To support Michelle's future, her mother sold a house and borrowed additional money from relatives to purchase a property in April 2014. The house, located in Campsie, was valued at 700,000 Australian dollars. Of course, they had only paid the down payment at that time. To live together and provide mutual care, Michelle's aunt and her family of 4 moved into the new house as well. Michelle quickly secured a job as an assistant for an IELTS instructor. Everything seemed to be going well, and Michelle felt hopeful about her future. However, on April 22, 2016, something unexpected happened. A few of Michelle Lang's friends were unable to reach her. She wasn't answering phone calls or responding to messages, which was completely out of character. Michelle's aunt also tried to contact her but had no success. At the time, her aunt was working in Wollongong, about 25 miles away, which required a 1-hour train ride. Although a bit worried, her aunt assumed that Michelle might have gone with friends to the Blue Mountains to see the autumn foliage, as it was a public holiday in Australia. Given the poor cell phone signal in that area, no one thought too much of it at first. It wasn't until 10:40 a.m. on April 24th, 2 days later, that a tourist near the mouth of Snapper Point in Central Coast Newcastle spotted something floating in the water that resembled a human body and alerted the police. After receiving the report, the police immediately arrived at the scene and retrieved the body from the water. It was identified as the body of a young woman, wrapped in a plastic bag, estimated to be between 20 and 30 years old with black hair. The victim had dozens of stab wounds, with fatal injuries to her neck. There were also signs that her wrists and ankles had been bound with rope. The estimated time of death was around 48 hours prior. Initial assessments indicated that this was a deliberate murder, with the perpetrator intentionally dumping the body at this location. No evidence of contact with rocks was found on the body, leading authorities to believe that this was not the primary crime scene. Unfortunately, due to prolonged submersion in water, many critical clues were destroyed, and no fingerprints or other evidence of the perpetrator could be recovered. Additionally, the victim's face was severely damaged, making it impossible to determine her identity. To solve the case quickly, the police used computer software to reconstruct the victim's facial features and release the image, hoping the public would come forward with any information. On the afternoon of April 25th, Michelle's aunt and uncle reported to the police that their niece had been missing for 3 days and asked for help locating her. The police suspected that the victim found the previous day might be Michelle. However, because the victim's face was severely disfigured and she was found unclothed with no clear identifying marks, identification was difficult. The police decided to compare DNA samples. They collected Michelle's personal items, such as a toothbrush, hairbrush, and other belongings. On April 26th, while the initial DNA results were still pending, the search for Michelle intensified. Many of her classmates and friends began posting about her disappearance online, especially the friend who had seen her on the afternoon of April 21st. The Chinese community in Australia was also deeply shaken, and widespread concern grew for Michelle's safety. After several agonizing days of waiting, at 8 a.m. on April 29th, the police finally announced the DNA comparison results. The victim found at Central Coast was indeed Michelle, the young woman everyone had been desperately searching for. Upon hearing the news, Michelle's mother collapsed in grief. Having already endured the loss of her husband, she now faced the devastating reality of losing her beloved daughter, who had just stepped into adulthood. The question remained on everyone's mind: who could commit such a cruel act? Michelle had always lived harmoniously with her aunt's family, and there had never been any reported conflicts. Thus, at first, her relatives were not considered suspicious. Michelle's aunt told police that on April 21st, Michelle had been out all day, and everything seemed normal when she returned home that afternoon. Her last known contact with the outside world was at midnight on April 21st, during a conversation with her IELTS teacher. After that, she completely lost contact, leading police to believe she was likely murdered on April 22nd. Could it be that someone had followed her during the day on April 21st, leading to her tragic death? The police decided to reconstruct Michelle's movements. Through extensive surveillance camera footage, they were able to retrace her steps on April 21st. First, Michelle went to her university and met with some classmates. At 3 p.m., she was seen shopping on Pitt Street in Sydney's central business district. After shopping, she took the subway from Central Station to Campsie, arriving home at approximately 4:40 p.m. Surveillance footage showed Michelle looking completely normal while shopping and riding the train, with no sign of anyone following her. There appeared to be no opportunity for her to encounter a stranger who might harm her. Surveillance footage further revealed that after Michelle returned home on the afternoon of April 21st, there was no record of her leaving the house again. Coincidentally, from April 21st to April 22nd, Michelle's uncle was the only other person in the house. Michelle's aunt was working in Wollongong and did not return home until the evening of April 24th, and her 2 children were also away. This analysis raised significant suspicion against someone who had previously been overlooked, Michelle's uncle. Given this, the police arrested Derek Barrett, charging him with murder and obtaining a search warrant to investigate further. Barrett, whose full name is Derek Barrett, was born in 1989 in a small town called Guandalan on the Central Coast. Not much is known about his early life, but after graduation he worked in IT for a tech company. It is unclear why he developed feelings for Michelle's aunt, who was nearly 20 years older than him. Shortly after they married, he lost his job. For the next 5 years, Barrett stayed home, unemployed, living a routine of sleeping during the day and playing video games at night. Although his family repeatedly urged him to find a job, warning that he would otherwise become useless, he always responded with, "I've applied for jobs, but I never hear back." Despite his unemployment and laziness, Barrett had a calm and polite demeanor. He was respectful to all 4 members of the household, including Michelle, and there were never any conflicts. Because of this, the family lived in harmony. Could such a seemingly mild-mannered man really be the one who murdered Michelle? Barrett's wife and 2 children could not believe it. They refused to accept that the man they had lived with for 5 years could commit such a crime. The family firmly believed that the police had arrested the wrong person. But was this really the case? As the investigation deepened, more incriminating evidence against Barrett began to surface. 2 tourists informed the police that they had seen Barrett at Snapper Point on the Central Coast. At the time, he told them not to approach the cliffs, claiming it was dangerous. Looking back, it seemed he was afraid they would discover the body he had just dumped. Surveillance footage also captured Barrett driving into the national park near Snapper Point early on the morning of April 24th. On his way there, he stopped at a gas station to buy a drink, and the store's security cameras recorded him. He appeared completely calm at the time. Police also recovered 19 nude photos of Michelle on Barrett's phone. These were taken after he had bound her wrists and ankles and gagged her with duct tape, forcing her to pose for the pictures. Although Barrett had deleted the photos, police technicians successfully restored them. Further evidence was found on his computer. It turned out Barrett had been secretly recording Michelle for a long time. He had hidden a camera behind the bathroom mirror to film Michelle while she showered and used the toilet. Shockingly, he did not even spare his wife. Barrett had also filmed her in secret. In addition, he would sneak into the bedrooms of Michelle and his wife while they were fast asleep and masturbate in front of them. All of these acts were recorded, revealing Barrett to be a depraved individual. Combining evidence, witness statements, and various leads, police pieced together the entire sequence of Barrett's crime. Barrett had developed a twisted obsession with Michelle Lang, his wife's niece. All of the politeness he displayed to the family had been a facade. Barrett had been waiting for an opportunity to assault her. That opportunity came on April 21st, when his wife left for work for 3 days, and his children were occupied elsewhere. That afternoon, Michelle returned home in good spirits, completely unaware of the monster lying in wait. That night, she made calls to her aunt and her IELTS teacher. After hanging up, Barrett, who had already prepared his plan, snuck into her room. Although Michelle fought back fiercely, she was no match for Barrett's strength. In the end, she was overpowered, tied up, and subjected to a brutal assault. On April 22nd, Barrett continued his depraved actions. However, he did not expect that at 3 p.m., his wife would unexpectedly return home and stay for 3 hours. During this time, Barrett locked himself in the bathroom, leaving the shower running continuously. At one point, he quickly ran to the kitchen to retrieve something, and then rushed back to the bathroom. He seemed very nervous about anyone, particularly his daughter, entering the bathroom. When his daughter later asked for shampoo to wash her hair, Barrett only cracked the door open slightly, handed her the shampoo, and told her to use another bathroom. At that moment, Michelle was likely still in the bathroom, perhaps even still alive. Tragically, his wife had no idea that something horrific was happening inside her own home. Police believed that if Barrett's wife had discovered his brutal actions at that time, she might have been killed as well. Over the next 2 days, only Barrett and Michelle were in the house. For reasons unknown, Barrett stabbed Michelle more than 40 times, with the most severe wounds to her neck. After committing the heinous crime, Barrett began planning how to dispose of the evidence. He decided on the cliffs at Snapper Point on the Central Coast, not far from his parents' home. The area's rugged terrain and powerful ocean waves made it the ideal location for hiding a body. On the morning of April 24th, Barrett wrapped Michelle's body in a plastic bag, placed it in the trunk of his car, and drove 62 miles, 100 kilometers, to Snapper Point. On the way, he stopped to refuel and bought a drink at a gas station, where security cameras recorded him appearing completely calm. After disposing of the body, Barrett deliberately visited his parents' house, just a few miles from Snapper Point. This visit was likely an attempt to establish an alibi in case police traced his movements to Snapper Point. That evening, Barrett drove to pick up his wife, pretending as if nothing had happened. He even mentioned that Michelle had not yet returned home. On April 25th, following Michelle's aunt's request, the couple went to the police station to report her missing. The rest of the story is now well known. The police's deduction was logical, and all evidence pointed to Barrett as the perpetrator. He had lived under the same roof with Michelle for 5 years, hiding his true nature. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Barrett continued to deny his crimes. Upon hearing the devastating news about her daughter, Michelle's mother immediately flew to Sydney. At a press conference, she broke down in tears, saying, "To this day, I still cannot accept the fact that my beloved daughter is gone. The pain is so overwhelming that I can hardly breathe." Learning that the killer was Barrett left her even more shocked and speechless. Her relationship with her sister had been strong, and she would never have allowed Michelle to live with them otherwise. She firmly believed that her sister knew nothing about Barrett's actions, as everyone had been deceived by his cunning and deceitful facade. Michelle's aunt was consumed with guilt and regret, blaming herself for not recognizing her husband's true nature sooner. On May 4th, 2016, the trial for Michelle's murder began. For the first time, Michelle's mother, relatives, and friends attended the courtroom. However, Barrett did not appear in court that day. His lawyer stated that Barrett maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed and that he intended to apply for bail to be released. On June 29th, the case was brought back to the local court. In addition to the murder charge, Barrett faced 27 other charges, including unlawful imprisonment, sexual assault, and filming others' private parts without their consent. The prosecution informed Michelle Lang's mother that this was only a preliminary hearing in the early stages of the trial and that her attendance was not necessary. However, despite not having fully recovered her health, she traveled once again from Chengdu to Sydney. She said, "Even if I have to sell our only house and lose everything, I will make sure the perpetrator is brought to justice." Due to additional evidence, the trial was postponed to August 10th, and then delayed again. During this time, Barrett attempted to evade responsibility by pretending to have a mental illness. However, after a medical evaluation, it was determined that he was not mentally ill. Perhaps realizing that escaping conviction was unlikely, Barrett did not apply for bail throughout the proceedings. On August 16th, 2017, the case resumed at the local court. This time, Barrett did not appear in person, but attended via video link. He voluntarily pleaded guilty to 5 of the 28 charges, including murder and unlawful imprisonment. However, he insisted, "I don't remember what happened. I just suddenly found myself staring at a sink full of blood." He claimed, I must have overdosed on drugs and eaten excessively, which caused me to lose control of my actions. It was clear that this statement was an attempt to mitigate his punishment. On December 13, 2017, the New South Wales Supreme Court held the sentencing hearing for Michelle's case. Barrett appeared in court and admitted to breaking into Michelle's room in the early hours of April 22nd. Despite her resistance, he tied her to the bed, took photos of her, stabbed her over 40 times, hid her body in the house for 2 days, and then disposed of it. He expressed what appeared to be remorse, saying, "My actions betrayed 2 families. She was such a beautiful girl. I feel ashamed of what I did. I am here to tell the truth and offer a small contribution, whether they accept it or not." However, throughout the hearing, Barrett kept his head down, shielding his eyes with a tissue. Police believed that his behavior demonstrated insincerity. During the proceedings, Barrett again emphasized that he could not clearly recall what had happened that day. He claimed there had been an argument, followed by his discovery of blood in the sink. He stated, "I don't know. I think about what happened and why I did it every single day. It makes me deeply sad." For his memory loss, he continued to blame a large intake of drugs and excessive eating before the crime. He claimed the drugs controlled him and that he had no knowledge of his actions. Naturally, the police rejected his explanation. Forensic psychology experts testified that methamphetamine typically does not cause memory loss, particularly at the dosage Barrett claimed to have taken. Furthermore, the nature of the crime clearly showed premeditation. From the act of murder to the disposal of the body, Barrett acted with purpose, following a coherent and logical plan. Surveillance footage showing Barrett calmly stopping to refuel his car and purchase a drink demonstrated his clear state of mind and composure during the incident. Experts also concluded that all evidence indicated Barrett was a sexual sadist with an extraordinarily high risk of reoffending, 10 to 100 times higher than the average person, making him extremely dangerous. They stated that prison was the safest place for him. In the end, Barrett was convicted of 22 charges, including 19 counts of recording intimate images without consent and 2 counts of possessing pornographic materials. 2 days later, New South Wales Supreme Court Justice Helen Wilson, based on the evidence presented by the prosecution, stated that Barrett's actions were an extraordinarily cruel, depraved, and cowardly crime. She further dismissed his claims of being controlled by drugs and suffering memory loss as completely fabricated. During the trial, Barrett occasionally shed tears, but they appeared insincere, more like a performance of remorse. Overall, he was a cold-blooded individual. After thorough deliberation, Barrett was sentenced to 46 years in prison, with no parole eligibility for 34 years and 6 months. Following the sentencing, Michelle's grief-stricken mother broke down in tears in court. She knew that Australia does not have the death penalty, so her greatest hope was for Barrett to be imprisoned for life. While the final outcome did not fully meet her expectations, she had no other choice. The lengthy trial had taken a severe toll on her, physically and emotionally, as she made countless trips between Sydney and Chengdu while enduring immense exhaustion. More heartbreaking than anything were her tearful words. "My Michelle is gone, and my life has completely fallen apart. There is no way to make up for this." With the final verdict announced, the case that had shocked both China and Australia finally came to a close. The perpetrator was punished, but the pain of Michelle's tragic death remained. As Detective Gary Jubelin told the media outside the courthouse, "While the investigation and trial delivered justice, this entire case remains a tragedy." Indeed, Michelle had worked so hard to gain admission to university, to study abroad, and to build a successful life. Yet her beautiful future, just beginning, was suddenly and cruelly ended. As time passed and Barrett remained behind bars, the tragedy slowly faded from public memory. However, no one could have predicted that a USB drive would reignite the case and thrust it back into the media spotlight. 3 years after the crime, in November 2019, an elderly woman living in Chatswood, just 3.7 miles from the house where Michelle was murdered, somehow came into possession of a USB drive. The woman had been suffering from Alzheimer's disease for years, rarely leaving her wheelchair or home. When her daughter visited and discovered the USB drive, she was shocked and had no idea where her mother could have obtained it. Out of curiosity, she plugged the USB into her computer. What she saw left her horrified and scarred for life. She immediately contacted the police and handed over the USB. The police were equally appalled by the depravity it contained. The USB held 9 video clips totaling approximately 60 minutes and 13 horrifying photographs. All of the content depicted Barrett's sadistic abuse and violation of Michelle from multiple angles. He treated Michelle not as a human being, but as a lifeless object, mercilessly beating and assaulting her. One particular video included Michelle's desperate plea. "You're insane! What are you doing? You can't treat me this way!" From her tear-streaked face and anguished expression, it was clear that she experienced unimaginable fear and pain but was powerless to escape. In the end, she succumbed to the devil's hands. After viewing the contents of the USB, the police immediately filed new charges against Barrett. Thousands of miles away, Michelle's mother received the devastating news, which caused her to collapse once again. Over the years, she had lived with the pain of losing her daughter, but no one could have imagined that an even greater agony was still to come. Michelle's mother said, "No mother in this world could accept such horrifying news. My Michelle was such a kind-hearted, thoughtful, filial, and upright child. Hearing what she endured, I feel as though my heart has been shattered into pieces." During this time, Barrett wrote an apology letter to Michelle's mother from prison, but the letter was filled with empty, insincere words. Michelle's mother rejected his apology. What was even more infuriating was that during his appeal process, Barrett continued to insist that he had been controlled by drugs. He even told a prison guard that he and Michelle were in a consensual romantic relationship, implying that she had willingly participated. It was clear that Barrett showed no real remorse or accountability for his actions. Supreme Court Justice Helen Wilson stated that had she known about the existence of the USB at the time of sentencing, she would have handed down a life sentence without parole. Unfortunately, double jeopardy laws prevented her from doing so now. However, based on the contents of the USB, the police brought 9 additional charges against Barrett, leading to an additional 25 years in prison. This new sentence, however, was ordered to run concurrently with his existing 46-year sentence. This meant that Barrett's total sentence duration remained unchanged, but his non-parole period was extended from 34 years to 36 years and 6 months. As a result, he will not be eligible for parole until October 27, 2052. This story comes to an end here. In an age of globalization, countless young people like Michelle Lang travel to foreign lands, carrying their dreams with them. They are courageous, but they are also vulnerable. When we are in an unfamiliar country, we often have a false sense of security. We tend to believe that danger comes from strangers or lurks in dark corners. However, reality shows that sometimes the greatest threat is hidden right beside us. Therefore, always stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and do not hesitate to speak up if you feel unsafe, no matter who is involved. It is also essential to thoroughly understand your new environment, connect with the local community, and frequently share updates with your family and friends. Never underestimate the importance of equipping yourself with basic self-defense skills because, ultimately, your safety is a responsibility only you can truly take on.